recently there was a death notice in the paper. An old tart, she was about 89, a miss, and I met an old lady years ago. She'd called on Kathy actually, post office. I struck her in across the sea at Kyalla, and she was Charlie Skinner's daughter. As far as I know, was still alive. She was 92 then, and Charlie Skinner was, not to make my face right, he was a draper apparently who owned a lot of country, a lot of dirt up Brunswick way. When coals moved into the era, he decided to buy the rest of the block to keep the buggers out, but they moved up into the next block. And his daughter, as far as I know, is still alive. And she'd have been, wait a minute now, she was the daughter of Charlie Skinner, who would have been Charles, yes, my grandfather's brother, you follow me? Like George Skinner and John Skinner and heaps of others. I've got the family tree there anyway. But this Charlie, this daughter, I struck her over, she called here, remember at the post office? And I wasn't about somewhere, and I went over to Kyalla to see her. Oh, an old tart too. I would doubt it. I'd say she's still very much alive. What have we got?
Just knocked the wire.
Pardon?
Just you knocked the wire then.
Oh. Everything in order? Well, do you want sort of start, or what the heck do you want?
I don't know, just whatever comes into your mind.
Right, well, crank her up, she'll go.
Oh, it's already been going.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Well, the best way I could put it on this very hot night in Tungamah, Spy Street, Norman Jellicoe Skinner. Very unusual name. The surviving eldest of the family of George, John and Alice. Speaking from my residence along with my wife Kath, and in Trevor Skinner, the son of George Cant Skinner, and his wife and son, which is excellent as I see it. I've been often thinking about talking to one of these things, never sort of gotten around to it, except in 1958 at the Back to Tungamah I did do a spruik in 3SR Shepparton, which I think the tape is still available, but those days have gone. I was born in Tungamah in 1915. I'm now 72. Born in Boyd Street in the what I think was classed as Mrs. Owen's Hospital, but I feel it was a laying-in place with a doctor in attendance. And I look back over many years. I was the eldest of 5 boys. The eldest of my family predeceased me, George Alexander, myself, Norman Jellicoe, George Cant, Russell John passed on, and Neil James passed on. So there are 2 survivors out of 5. We did, to all intents and purposes, our mother and father adopted a girl called Velda Walden, who was the youngest of 12. Her mother died bearing her in Burnt Street. And she lived with us for very many years, and we've maintained that connection. I grew up basically further down from where the old shop still is, in Burnt, the corner of Burnt and Middleton Street, down what was known as the Crib. And I think 3 of us at least lived there. Survivors anyway, myself, George Cant and Russell John. Neil James was born further up Middleton Street in what was then the doctor's hospital, and we later moved up to the present residence, which my grandfather built beside the workshop, and that was roughly 107 years ago, and I am pleased to say that it's still operating. I feel this is somewhat unusual anywhere, possibly in Victoria, that the place has been running so long under the one family name, and I'm quite happy to be down there. I have no son. My daughter, who lives in Canberra, Sandra, I don't think would hang on to it very long. My wife's been on me for some years to get rid of it, but I'm still down there, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to know that my grandfather had been trained as a tool and implement maker in North Melbourne, what was then known as Lennon's plough makers. I think in the museum in Melbourne is the silver plough, which it is, which was made at Lennon's, a copy of what my grandfather was quite capable of making. And I still have a single furrow plough down there. I was told by an old man many years ago that if I happened to strike one that had one leg missing off the H for Hugh, that it would have been done at my grandfather's forge. Well, I was fortunate enough to pick that up. I have a Skinner Brothers double furrow plough and a Skinner Brothers 3 furrow plough and a Skinner 4 furrow. They're widely known throughout the whole, I think, of Victoria and New South Wales as plough makers, mainly by virtue of their ability to transfer or change double furrows into 3 when things were getting a little bit bigger. John Skinner, whom I never knew, broke up with my grandfather in the early 90s and went over to a place called Rock Pile out of Cosgrove near Dookie. And I have since, fortunately, been able to contact some of those people, but the main influence at all times was to George Skinner, and I would remark at this stage, when Skinner Brothers broke up, he very carefully ground the BROS of Skinner Brothers and used the brand from then on, Skinner, which I thought was rather shrewd. I still have the brand, and it's noted in many parts of Victoria and the Riverina, the name Skinner Brothers and also Skinner, but more so Skinner Brothers. I never knew my grandfather. He died, I think I might have been 6 months old, 1915 or thereabouts, when he passed out at the age of 63, and I'm quite certain it was his fault that I have the, might I say, the name of Jellicoe on the end of it, of my name of Norman, because at that time Lord Jellicoe was in charge of the British fleet, and they were busy fighting the Germans in the First World War, known as the Great War. My dad, I think, was about 2 when he got here. He was born in North Melbourne, and the family came up here. I lived originally down in a place called Burn Street, which is below Burnt Street. Purchased the block and built the place on it. I recall I was about 10, I think, or 11, coming home from school and seeing a lot of stuff floating away down below the racecourse. It turned out to be the roof of the place. A whirlwind got in and took the whole show to glory. It has since been rebuilt, and I have modified it and added to it and one thing and another. And as I say, I'm very happy to be there as the last surviving one on the dunghill. I've often referred to it as such. My dad's eldest sister was Anne Skinner, who married a fellow called Miller. She was a very capable woman, strong-minded. I believe my grandfather spoiled her. I don't know whether that's right or not. I think he may have done. She bore a girl and 2 boys. They've all passed on. The last one, second last one to go, was Ella, her daughter, who was the most accomplished person in many ways, chiefly through the piano. And I think from memory, an MBE or something of that nature on her efforts in the town of Mildura, or the city of Mildura, for the purpose of advancing music. I recall going to a funeral along with my only uncle, Norman Skinner's daughter, Moira, who still lives down in Croydon in Victoria. Quiet little girl, very capable. At one time wrote for the Australian Journal and is still a writer of considerable note. She has a brother in Tasmania, whom I've never met, Clyde Skinner. I believe he has a family of some type, but I never ever struck any of them. Further along the line was Ethel Skinner, who married a fellow called Harris, who set up with the Victorian producers in Yarram. Was very successful down there. Both his boys are dead, Billy Harris and Alan. Alan also, Fire Brigade seemed to be a background to a lot of them. Norman Skinner joined from Tungamah into the Fire Brigade, joined the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in Melbourne, and later became the Chief Officer of Tasmania, which he was for many years. He was Moira's father. Alan Harris also got an MBE over Fire Brigade, something of that nature anyway. And over the years, my grandfather, I'm pleased to say, kicked the Tungamah Fire Brigade into being in 1889, prior to the formation of the Country Fires Brigades Board, which nowadays is known as the CFA. He was captain of the brigade for many years. They were entirely and highly successful. There's a tribe of trophies down on the old fire station which today would be worth thousands of dollars. And my father later became captain of that brigade. I myself was captain of it for 28 years. They retired me at 65 with what they call the Queen's Medal and a Gold Star. I don't pay much attention to that sort of thing, but they're sitting up there in a little box anyway. And to go further down the family, I think the next was Sis Janet. Her husband married her in Tungamah. He was a printer. Later went to Tatura, printed the Tatura Free Press for very many years. 3 daughters. Marge, the youngest, is dead. The other 2 are alive in Tatura. The eldest is, the second eldest is Jean, and the eldest is, at the moment, the name evades me, just for a second. But the next down the line was Norman, whom I've already covered in Tasmania. Then a girl who married a fellow called Jim Mulquinny of Tungamah. They later moved into New South Wales. I think she brought him about 10 children. Some of them are still alive. I have met quite a few of them. She died bearing the last one, and her name would have been Ethel Mulquinny. She was officially adopted by the first girl referred to as Anne Miller, or Anne Skinner, who named her Ethel Miller. She was reared in Croxton in Victoria. Today lives down in South Australia. Has several daughters. A very nice person. Has always maintained an interest in the background to our particular crew, and I've kept fairly good contact with her. The youngest was Rose Clark, who married a baker from Tungamah by the name of Lynn Clark. Wound up in the baking game after many moves around at Dookie over in Victoria. And her eldest daughter, Merle, died recently in Dookie from emphysema. Whether the flower had anything to do with that, I do not know. But the eldest of that particular crew is still alive, Gordon, and a girl, Marge, and a boy, Neil, is alive, and Ray Clark is dead, been dead for many years. That seemed to cut out the older part of the family, and in that pecking order, as it would have went by virtue of age, I'd have been about 10 or 11, I think. The Millers would have all been ahead of me, and Moira Skinner, and Bertha Hill, whom I couldn't think of a moment ago, and Jean Hill, Billy Harris, Alan Harris. I think I would have been, as I say, around 10th in the pecking order as it went by virtue of the generation that came from that. I look back over many things. My brother's George, as I say, Trevor is here tonight. That's why I'm making this bit of a spruik. Neil had one son, Gary, who lives up at Euston. Rusty, who's passed on, had 2, Michael, Tungamah, and Colin, Yarrawonga, and Rosalie, present time Tungamah. Myself, I have a boy and a girl, unfortunately, who didn't survive long up in the cemetery. And my 3rd daughter, Sandra, lives in Canberra. And might I say it, even though I say it myself, a very smart piece of goods. She has 3 daughters and an excellent little girl. Trevor knows her well, and I gather from what he's told me today, he'll be in Canberra shortly, and I'm quite sure that they'll get together. They have been together before. I recall, I think, it cost me a lot of money to get a tooth capped that might have got knocked out down off a surfboard in those days. But she still has her teeth anyway, so it was successful. Tonight in Tungamah is extremely hot, and I don't mean maybe. It's as hot as I've known it, and Trevor's son is not enjoying the heat over well, but we've got a cooler going, and tomorrow morning I will endeavour to carry on with what we've started off tonight on. Trevor gets up pretty early, so do I, and we'll carry on from there. Over and out.
Saying something, anything.
Pardon?
I'd just say anything, I want to check it. Test
Watching a little bit of the old days cricket, just saw Harvey run out. See how he went. Okay. Bring it over this way a little bit. Oh, just a continuation of last night, 30th of January. Rosalie Skinner here, that's Rusty's daughter, producing quite a number of her photos of one thing or another of a trip of the old world, which she's not long back from. No doubt would have enjoyed it. But I'm going to make an endeavour here to recap or reminisce, I suppose you could call it, of some earlier days. Trevor's father George and I, a couple of years apart, but we grew up together, and I recall our old days down in what they called the crib. I remember going up the street one day. Mum had sent us up for some reason or another, I don't know why. And on the way back, we came across a bloke who was a pretty tall old fellow with the name of Ahern, and he was apparently well bamboozled, and he was laying the full width of the footpath. He hit up against the fence, and his feet almost in the gutter, sound asleep, and out of his pocket had dropped a box of matches. Of course, George and I picked them up, went down beside the old shop. There's some grass there, so we struck a match and lit the grass in due course. The hand was burning quite nicely, wouldn't have hurt anything, I don't think. But a lady arrived along and went crook and put the fire out. We went home, me naturally being the eldest with my tail down, and it wasn't long before the local policeman arrived. He was a mounted man in those days by the name of Carruthers, and he had a moustache with the ends curled up on it, twisted up into a big noise. I remember the old crib, veranda, and the two rooms up the front with blinds, and he made his presence known. My mother came out. Yes, Mr. Carruthers. Told her the tale. George and I are back behind the chimney, the end of the house, waiting to see what the hell happened. And he commenced to tell her all about it. He didn't get very far. She hailed straight into him, said if he would remove the drunks off the street, her boys would be never likely to find matches. Therefore wouldn't have got into any trouble. Anyway, the policeman left, and the eldest boy naturally got a hiding, which was me. George dodged the whole show. I don't quite know how, but he did. And sometime later, we're poking around as we usually did as kids, doing this, that and the other, and I suppose a lot of wrong things. But being 2 years younger than me, I would have gone to school a good deal before him. I don't remember it, my first day at school, no recollection. But I do recall going up to burn the Kaiser, which is the end of the First World War. I remember the lass called Esther Corboy, straight up past the water tower, over to this great bonfire, which it was, and took me many years to wake up later on how a very big box tree had been killed. It is no doubt due to the bonfire. But my first day at school, so I've got no recollection. I know my teacher was a Miss Jean Mack, and I don't recall any part of it. But later on, not much later either, George was a little shorter than me, not much, very round in the head, and was so much like his grandmother, who was always classed as being such. Pretty studious sort of a bloke in his way, and, might I say, a bit bad-tempered. When he wanted something, he got it. If he didn't, well, being the eldest, I took the brunt of all this. But we took then, at a later stage, George wasn't with us. We were still living down in the crib. headed up towards what was known as McKissick's blacksmith shop at the back of the present Masonic Hall, for some reason or another. And 3 blokes, one down below with a big hat, collecting all the eggs. As the bloke is still alive, Tobe Havik is well up the tree, collecting these eggs, and Dick Saunders, my wife's brother, advising him how to go up a bit further, and Jack Saunders, known as Tabulja, down below collecting them. And I remember my cousin and I appealing to him to give us an egg. Just give us one sparrow egg, and he wouldn't. No way. He had short trousers and long socks and a black cretonne coat on. Anyway, when they were leaving the tree to go to the next one, we didn't get an egg anyway. He said, look, he stuttered a bit. He said, have a look in here. And in the pocket, he had 2 hen sparrows. I knew a hen from a cockbird by virtue of their colouring, sitting on the biggest egg ever I saw. God, it was a big egg. And he said, now they'd been sitting on this for about a month and it was about due to come out. You can have this egg. So he handed me the egg, great big egg. I said to my cousin Gordon Clark, if this egg has been sat on for a month, it's about due to come out. And the tree had a bit of a butt around the bottom of it, so I thought, well, I'll throw this egg against the tree and see what comes out of it. Well, it was rotten. It was a turkey egg, as it turned out. I found out later, many years later. And home, it splashed on Gordon's new boots. And home he goes, crying like the billy cow. I follow over along, got another one. It was the cause of my cousin getting rotten egg on his boots. Well, later on, we moved up to the old place, which is beside the shop now, where Rusty lived for years, and his wife and family are still there, or his daughter. And we were introduced, had been at an earlier stage, to the Murray River. My dad was a great fisherman. We'd get in the buggy, and the horse was known as Bill the Bart. Yeah. Well, it was a place known as the Wattle Creek. It 2 fairly steep pulls, and the horse wouldn't be in it. So we'd all get out, even George and I as kids, and push, along with several other fellows, one of Kathy's brothers and a bloke that worked with Dad. We'd eventually get the buggy up the creek, and then Bill would take it along quietly, and away we'd go fishing. And we're only kids. Dad would cut down a bit of a sapling and tie a piece of fishing line on the end of it. George and I used to fish, and we caught some fish too. I remember one night I caught a cod about 12 pounds, and I couldn't get him up the bank or down the bank or into the boat or anywhere. I started to cry. Someone come along and got the fish out anyway. And I'm very happy with myself. Sat there and looked. He was on the tether for the next 2 days, never done any more fishing. But he used to camp in a pretty big tree. It was a big tree too. It had been hollowed out. And there was Dad, a fellow called Peter MacDonald, who always went to the river with an Edwards tea tin, a knife, fork and spoon and a plate, nothing else. My mother used to feed him. And we did a lot of fishing, as I say. And on one occasion, one morning, George and I were asleep there, hear a hell of a cackle, and so old Peter MacDonald laughing. Dad had gone over the top of the bank with a billy can and the pipe light, of course, to go down and get some water. The bank was fairly steep, in he went. And Pete started laughing, and he woke every jackass between Cobram and Yarrawonga, I think. And the story was, I don't particularly recall it, the Dad came out with his hat still on, the billy of water, and still a smirk of smoke out of his pipe, wet of course. And we repaired to the tree, and we'd done this for years. We'd leave the Murray to come home before the channel system went in, and George and I would immediately hit the paddocks and start chasing hares or anything we could chase. And we would run from there to the Boozy Creek, which was some 9 miles down. Never turned a hair. Never turned a hair. But we enjoyed it. Then we'd come home. Eventually get home. I would be there, of course, waiting. And I recall the first occasion that I was introduced to cards. It was what they called coon can. And I thought if you got the highest score you won. Well, apparently if you got the highest score you lost. I remember that. I was most crestfallen. I got 100 very quickly, and therefore I was out. I thought by having the 100 still in my hand I'd won, but I didn't. I was lost. Well then, we took to rabbiting, along with a fellow called Pudmay. His father was a rabbit trapper, an old family in Tungamah, and away we'd go. Saturday morning, any time. Head off. Remember getting out about 7 miles at our longest run, I think. Rabbits, we had dogs, of course, and God knows what. Caught a lot of rabbits. And you'd have about 6 or 7 pairs of rabbits tied around your neck with the legs linked. And on the way home, the dogs would catch another one or two, and you put them up, and they'd all pee down your neck. Never forget that. My mother used to skin the lot. We always skinned them. We were shot, of course, knocked up. We'd have a feed and go to bed. She'd go out in the old wash house down there, the old place, and skin the lot. And used to send the skins to Benalla. I think S.H. Waters were the people that used to have the skins, and the man that signed the cheques was Andy Brown, with the most tremendous handwriting ever I've saw, before or since. You ever seen your love? Andy Brown? S.H. Waters, Benalla, Andy Brown, the skin buyer, love? It's near me. Anyway, the cheques wouldn't be very big. You might get 3 rabbit skins at the top price and various bits and pieces. And the penny bank, I think it was called, it opened at the school. Well, we always had something in the penny bank. I don't recall very much how much I wound up with, but our mother was always quite sure that something had gone into that bank, the school bank. And on one occasion, this is true, we had a staghound, or half stag, and a very good dog, George and I, and a greyhound, a fox terrier, and a water dog. Well, eventually the 2 dogs occasionally ran down a hare, and Scotty the foxy and Tup the water dog hit in time to tear it to pieces. By the time we got up, they tore hell out of it. On this occasion, we're out in what is known as Blair's paddock. George recalled this very well. Up gets a hare. We decided to chase him, and we logged him. A fair bit of timber in the paddock, but we logged that hare, George and I. I'll never forget him crying when we got him out. Thumped hell out of him with an axe and a setter and God knows what, but we got him anyway. And I'd say they're one of the few people, well, the pair of us that ever run a hare down, and we did. We knocked him up. So that's why I don't suppose a man's got cancer of the lung. Because all he done was run. Anyway, many funny things have happened over the years, concerned a lot with rabbits. Our mother took us out one time to stay a Saturday night at the old Uarang Hall. We moved in there and set traps all over the place. Mum was a goer in the old buggy, and her boys were going to go rabbiting. So out we go. Set the traps. In the morning, heard a few squeals through the night. We got a cat and caught both of our Scotty and Tuppy on the way up to get the traps out. That's about all we got out of it. And you look back on these things and laugh. I remember one time George had a bread knife and he sharpened it up to glory. And we used to keep it up a tree at Burke's Bend, this particular knife. George, oh God, he had it sharp. And he went to cut off a piece of German sausage, very nearly cut his finger off. So that was the end of the knife. I didn't know where it wound up. But many funny things happened up there. And one tale concerns a brother of Kathy's, my wife, Cock he was known as. About the only time for the year that my mother had her way was Good Friday. There was never to be any meat in the Skinner family. She had it many other times with us, but with Dad, that was it. Up at the river, and Cock had his lump of German sausage, quite a big roll. Come to have a feed on Good Friday, and Cock's carving off a lump of German sausage. And Dad said, "Hey, Cock, you can't eat that." He said, "It's no meat on Good Friday." He said, "It's not meat, George." He said, "It's German sausage." I'll never forget that. Along with many other funny things that happened at that river. Oh, God, there were some funny things, but a bit dim with me now, and I would take too long, I suppose, to run out on them. But as we grew a little older, I'll never forget at school, I always ran last in the races. The show was known as the Waycott Shield, which was an important event. It concerned all schools from Gurumbat to Katamatite, and was quite a big gathering. And you saw the kids that run and that didn't run and one thing and another. And I, as I say, always used to run last, so I never got a start in this. But I recall a New Year's Day Sports, which was a premium event in Tungamah, had been on for very, very many years. Went down there, had a shilling to get in the gate, busted, George and I, and he got himself into the 220 and he won it. And we split it. And just as he finished, he ran over a bottle and cut his foot. Well, that sort of dampened the show a little. And George was a pretty good tennis player, a left-hand batsman of the cricket, and by God, he could hit too. At tennis, he followed that very closely for a lot of years, and he played extremely well. Football is a good one too. He left Tungamah in 1938, I recall it, after a grand final, which we won. I tipped my car over with Kathy, my wife, on the way home, somewhere out about Euroa, a little black Ford, which I had for many years. And eventually it was repaired. Took about 5 years to pay it off. It only cost me 160 or 70 quid at the time. Through a crowd called the Economic Cash Buying Company. Don't think it's very economic, but anyway, that's how these things went. And getting back a little earlier, which I have recounted to Trevor on one occasion, if not more, and George would remember this, fire brothers, builders and undertakers, Tungamah. Big noises, always looked up to. They had a tremendous timber yard and had been there. They were original settlers and builders at Hill Plain in Tungamah, which goes back to 1873. Anyway, we got up this night, George and I, we had half a dozen rabbit traps, decided to set them. A lot of rabbits up around fires, timber and stacks of timber and God knows what. So we're busy setting up these rabbit traps. And clank, after dark, naturally, Mrs. Farr was a cross old lady, clink, 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 up the yard comes the hearse. Apparently they'd been to Dookie, to a funeral, old Montfar, and a fellow called Jim Parcel. And I recall very well their hearse shed was made of the first asbestos cement ever I'd saw. They had two hearses, the other one was up the top. Black horses, of course, and a wall, great big high old thing with plumes and God knows what. And hearse pulls into the yard. We propped, of course, George and I, out behind the shed. Anyway, pull the hearse up, backed her in towards the shed. Old Mott gets down from the high perch, undoes the horses, dropped the traces, one thing another. They walked off towards the stable, and we're agape. Quiet as a mouse, not a sound. Old Mott goes round the back and opens the door of the hearse, winded of course, and goes yank. And I'll never forget it. Out comes old Jim Parcel. Apparently he'd got boozed on a dookie, and he'd carried him over in the hearse and dropped him out on the ground and walked off and left him. Old Jim stayed there for a while, got up and waddled off anyway. And George and I continued to set the traps. I think we caught a cat from memory. No more. We might have got a cat. But I'll never forget that. The old hearse. I saw so much of it over the years as a kid. I remember my grandmother's funeral quite well, not my grandfather's. Anyway, when George left here at 38, we'd gone through a lot of times, a lot of fun, a lot of problems, I suppose. He was very studious. He took himself of a night into an accountancy course, which he eventually passed and played little hell in that game. But I remember he bought a wireless. I've forgotten the name of it now. It was a very old type of thing. Rattling old contraption, the first one we had. And he used to listen to it from time to time. And George had his little desk up in the front room beside the fireplace, and he worked pretty assiduously there. Never done much in the shop. I don't think he was greatly interested in that respect. But sometime during the war, I'd gone off into the Air Force, and Neil, who's since passed on, and Rusty, both gone. Rusty was sort of carrying the place on, and Neil was in the army, got in at 18. He came home and decided to give Rusty a hand to steal what they call a router ploughshare. Big heavy old things, about 6x1 steel they were, one Saturday afternoon. doing it for a bloke called Tom Wren.
And where was the other one? It was
And there was a wooden water tub at the tap beside the old anvil, or not far away, 6 or 7 feet away. About 50 gallons, I suppose. And out comes this great heap of stuff. Instead of brushing it down or something, they'd done neither. Neil had his army boots on, but gaping on top. He hadn't done them up. And the first good hit, out lumps a lump of scale, hot, red-hot scale, white-hot scale, landed him in the boot. And he gives a great hop. He's a long-legged fellow, Neil. He's about 6'3", jumps about 6 feet in the air, and Rusty said, "Stick it in the tub." And he said, "Stick it up your ass." And he never ever turned up in the shop again. His final appearance. That's one of the things you remember. It's funny. You look back, a fellow called Mark Williams, he's still alive. I believe he's got a leg off. And myself, I was only a kid. My dad, a fellow called Jim Frawley, and the bloke that gave me the rotten turkey egg. A great big 2.5-inch axle to be welded in the forge. Mark Williams and I were the first 2 strikers. We were supposed to stick the whole show, and then these other 2 fellows to come in and dress it. And Dad's playing a tune on the anvil that Trevor saw this morning. Same old anvil. I believe it was his 7th. He'd broken 6, but this stopped him. And Williams and I got us stuck. And a fellow called Jim Frawley, right, the old fellow rung for the 2 fresh strikers. In comes Frawley, whack, and there's no second whack. Whack again, no second whack. The old fellow called a halt, tickled the anvil, stop. And to Jack Saunders, standing back with the hammer in his hand, he said, "Hit it." To George, he said, I stuttered a bit, he said, I don't like to. Well, the old fellow went to hurdle the anvil, and he got his basil caught in the horn of the anvil and tipped over, finished up throwing the hammer at him when he went out the front door. And from then on, had to push 2 sheets of iron off the rear of the forge to get the great long axle in. It started off 2 sections for about 6 or 7 feet long. It wound up 12 or 14 feet long. So to get it back into the fire, to get it hot again, had to punch 2 sheets of iron off the wall to get the damn thing hot. And I saw so many funny things down in that shop in my time. My dad was a tooth puller. When the old hospital burnt down, Neil was born up in the hospital, up in Midland Street. Dad got all the dentist's tools. Where they've gone now, I don't know, but he did have the lot. And various blokes had arrived down to have a tooth pulled, particularly old fellows. Remember old Jumbo the Indian? Used to sit there, he'd sit him on the old swage block, which is still there, put the hand on top of there with a wallop and yank on. And occasionally he'd get the wrong one. I remember he pulled teeth for old Peter McDonald, Ted Burke, Jim May, Bob May, oh God knows who. If they wanted to, the old fellow would pull it. And one tale is told of him, which I wouldn't have any reason to doubt. Dad liked a beer, drank a lot of it. It was the Tungamah Hotel, and there was a Swedish bloke arrived and he had a toothache somewhere on the bottom jaw. And the old fellow said he'd pull the tooth out. So went down to the shop and picked up the bag of tools, brought them back up, and the Swede is a pretty big fellow. So Dad got up on the step of the pub, which is up about 8 inches, or thereabouts, and stood the Swede down on the bottom, a bottle of whiskey into him and attack him. Well, I believe he pulled 7 before he got the right one. Bloody one, he didn't die, the bloke. How, I'll never know. But the things that sort of went on over a fair period, I recall the day much after the war. Percy Creek was working with me, and 6 o'clock closing. We'd get up there at, say, 3 minutes to 6 and order 2 pots. And the old lady, Mrs. Johnson, had shut the door on your nose, a slide door, and if you had your nose in, she'd cut it off. This particular day, a fellow called Vin Whitty. Percy's got his pot of beer there, and Vin Whitty come up the side. I'd shot his horse, 6 bob in those days, and he had 3 teeth that used to flap, 3 top teeth. And Percy Spear standing there, and old Vin coming in, he landed the 3 teeth right across the alleyway, fair into Percy's beer. Never forget that. Vin Whitty's 3 teeth sitting up in Percy's only first grog he did, he hadn't had it even, never got a chance. And many funny things went on around the town, but that is one of them that I would recall particularly. And another one big tall fellow. He's about 6'3". He's dead now. Morris Geary. And this same Vin Whitty, both big tall fellows, operate as Geary brothers on one side, and the other side are Whitty brothers. But Vin wasn't the boss, Morris was. Both boozed, come down past the shop, and Vin decided he was going to buy Morris Geary's calves. And I can recall as well, said to Percy, have a look at this. And Vin said, Whitty brothers will buy, and Morris said, Geary brothers will sell. Well, they got down towards where the calves were, both got their legs tangled up and fell arse over his head and decided to have a fight, or a scruff or something. That was the end of the calf sale or anything else. And another occasion there, an old fellow called Arthur Grennis. Little old fellow, not so tall enough, I suppose, but always had a shake, skinny as a rake. George Cant, remember him. And the paddock beside where old Arthur lived, his wife was as deaf as a post, Mrs. Grennis, couldn't hear a thing. And she had white turkeys, and they were in a paddock next door to Grennis's, where Popeye Myers lives now, and old Paddy Sheridan came down to shoo these turkeys out of what was supposed to be the old Victoria Hotel paddock. I'll shut up when he's ready. And down comes old Arthur on a stick, 2 hands to hold onto the pipe. He needed it too. Skinny, poor old bugger. He comes down, old Paddy shooing the turkeys. An old man too. So Arthur pulls up and shapes up. Hung the walking stick on the post. Creek, watching this, shapes up and said, come on now, we'll finish this here and now. Old Paddy bolted, I'll never forget that, and where the turkeys went, and old Arthur wouldn't have been capable of knocking the ash off his pipe. He wouldn't have either. No way. Oh, God, we saw some funny things there. I remember, George would recall this, Robertsons, the contractors, lived in a place I've recently sold. They had about 40 horses, teams and men and tents, and built a road right through the town. And old Robertson, every time he came into the shop, would shake hands. Come in for a bolt or something. George, shake hands. Then when he left, he'd shake hands again. And this day come down with a bit of string with a couple of knots in it and said, now he wanted a piece that long, the knots between the string. Right, so the old fellow gave him a 2-foot brass rule. Now he said, Mr. Robertson, you go up and measure that and come back and tell me how long it was. Back lands old Robbie with the rule. He said, it was that long plus 2 knots in the string. I'll never forget that. And Robertsons, they were great men and came from Woornearth up near Ballarat. And we still have a connection with one of the boys, but they are things that have... George, as I say, would recall it as well as I would. I've never saw as many horses, nor as much horse shit, nor wagons. And whilst they were here, they went to solid wheel trucks. International trucks with a solid wheel on them. And I remember Alec Robertson, when they got trucks, they had drummed petrol, decided to wash his overalls in petrol. And he rubbed the 2 buttons together and she blew. Burnt yellow. Remember that, love? It did burn him too. Burnt him severely. But these are things that have sort of gone on. And as I say, we climbed trees, chased rabbits, played little hell, and never got into much strife, I don't think. We may have done. But we both got our merit anyway, which was, Mum was highly delighted on. I don't think the old fellow was very concerned. I suppose he thought we should have done. But you look back over these things, and I think I might dry up at this juncture.
You remember that time that fellow, he used to dress really well, and he went out to this farm, and the pig or something got hold of his collar.
This occurred, and Kathy, my wife, knows the tale. Paddy Wren worked on Walden's chaff cutter, and they had been up at an old place, a place up the road, still up there, nobody lives there now, Squeaky Jack McMahon's, and the tucker was always crooked. I never had a feed there, but I'd heard so much about the place, like it was stinking. And old Dada Walden, the father of about 10 of them, plus the wren mob to cut the hay for chaff, said, now look, you fellas stop here for dinner. And Paddy said be very careful about whether he would or not. Dada said, there's nothing wrong with the tucker, it's quite good. Nothing wrong with it at all. So Mrs. McMahon was a dirty old bugger, and she was, and the chops were about 1 foot long. So Paddy Wren always put his dancing pumps on, he was a feeder, and his good coat with the cutaway pockets to turn up for lunch. Anyway, in they go, and Paddy dives into the butter churn and cut a mouse in half. Well, he said that was the end of things to a degree. They left and come into the Tungamah pub to have their tucker. But in the meantime, Paddy ran and stuck the 2 chops wrapped in a hanky into his cutaway coat pocket. So they leave there and go down to Hopkins, which is Hopkins brothers are, well, unique. They're still down there. One's 83, the other's 82 or something, and a rough old joint always was. So they go down there to cut hay for hoppies, about only 3 miles from Walden's, or 2 miles, and Paddy winds the suit cut up very carefully and hangs it on a barbed wire fence. Forgot that 2 chops were still in the pocket in the handkerchief. And apparently along come an old sow pig with about 5 young uns and must have smelled them. And started nudging at the coat, and Tom Wren and his brother Dick spotted this and said, "Hey, wait till nigger," they called him nigger, "wait till nigger wakes up, what's on?" He's feeding away at the cutter, noisy old show, and they waited till the pig got the coat down. Said, "Hey, Paddy, take a look at this." Paddy pulls the goggles down, and there's his coat. The pig's heading off across the paddock with the young ones chasing it, got 1 foot in the one